when we talk about programming computers, it's always with the goal of making the machine do something that we're not really good at, or maybe we just don't want to do. And one of the things that a computer can do really well is the same thing over and over and over again. So what I'm talking about is called looping for JavaScript, right? And in this lesson, we're going to talk about for loops. And specifically, we're going to talk about sequential for loops. This is a way of telling the machine to like do something over and over and over again a certain number of times. So we're going to put the for keyword, and then we have our parentheses. Now, what we're planning to do here is we're going to do something over 10 times. And the first thing I'm going to do is initialize a variable. So we're going to do variable, right? And this kind of convention for loops, I'm going to use I. Okay, and I just stands for index, and we're going to set it to 0, okay, with our semicolon. We're gonna do space, click our I, which is index, is gonna be 0, right? And we wanna, like I said, we wanna go, we're gonna do something at least 10 times. So we're gonna say 10, okay? And then the next thing is we have our index again, and we're going to increment that by 1. And you can just do plus, I believe. Let's do plus. There's an easier way to do that, but I know plus equals 1, to increment that. Okay. And again, this I, we're indexing it, and indexing it is going to start at 0. We already know it's 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, and then we're going to execute whatever we're going to execute at 10. It's going to be 10 times. Okay, so let's phrase this. We said 1 less or equal to 10, that's good. And then just incrementing it, just making sure. And we have our curly brackets, right? I'm gonna do 2 curly brackets. I'm gonna go inside the curly bracket, shift and enter. So now we need to put something in these curly brackets here, right? Because we have our, our initiation. We're initializing this, right? So we got to put something into these curly brackets to, what do we want to do? So what we're going to put in these curly brackets is what the loop is going to run is something simple. I don't want to get too crazy. We're just going to do, just the log in the console. Okay. So we're going to do something like console, spell right, console.log, and is that yes, I. Okay, so and again, it's just a simple message. You're just gonna give you the value of I, each time it goes through the loop to the console. All right, so we make sure we're gonna close it because we're good old girls here. Console.log. Okay, just want to make sure I wrote all of these right. Okay, cool. Which is not really, we're gonna run it, see what happens. But just to recap here, what we're doing here is we're initializing a variable to 0. Okay, you see variable I, and we're doing it 0. And we're incrementing it every time, we're incrementing by 1, as you can see, every time it goes through until it's no longer less than 10. So this should execute, 10 times, and let's try it. So let's go from here, and then let's click enter. And as you can see, it did actually execute 10 times, and it went through 0 to 9, which is 10, right? Because we're starting at 0. Now, you're going to have a whole bunch of stuff between these curly brackets, not just one line that says console. We're going to have a whole bunch, but we're just making it simple so you can kind of understand for loops, right? Sequential for loops to be exact. So let's take a look at another example, something that you kind of might see in the real world here. Let me close this, clear that out. And then let's go over to adding this here, control copy. I'm going to copy this block. And as you can see, we have our variable, which we have our page names, and it's basically just an array of, home, about us, contact us, it's what is it? Page names. And, you know, we're going to go on. So we have our array here. In the real world, you might see this set up a different type of way to populate these titles, because what we're doing now, if we was to actually, you know, if we're actually coding this, it would be called something like hard coding. But again, this is just simple, and we're just, you know, we just want you to, you know, get the simple syntax version of it, and then we can go on more. So we have this page names, this array of page names, and we're going to look at a piece of code that'll go through this array and tell us that we found, you know, the page that we're on. To do this on the web page browser, we do have to access a document object on the red browser. It's called like document object model. But let's go ahead and actually, so this is what we're going to do our for loop. I can just go ahead and, you know, define that variable right there. So we're going to go ahead and do a for loop, right? For, and then our parentheses. And then inside of our parentheses, we can do the same thing. We're going to index with our I, it's going to increment from 0. And then we're going to index, and it's going to be less than or greater than page names. And then we're going to check the length, right? In that, and then we're just going to increment that by 1 once again, okay? Excuse me, we do have our curly brackets that we need to put something inside of them. Oops, we're gonna put something inside of them. And we're gonna put something, actually give you a code, a block of code that we already have for this. Paste that code in here. So right here, we're checking page length instead of just saying it 6 times or whatever. And if the length of the array changes, this piece of code does not have to. And then, like I said, we're going to increment by 1, just like we did before. So the first time this loop executes, we're going to be checking page name sub 0, which is home. And if we're on the home page, you know, this will execute. And if not, the one will execute, and so forth until we go through all of these. So let's actually, let's check this for loop. Let's check this real life example of a loop here. And as you can see, it says that we're not here, we're not at any of these pages because we're in the JavaScript console. This is really more going to gear towards a JavaScript playground that we will, I may or may not add access to this just because, again, I want you guys to really just pay attention to the syntax. We'll start getting more into sandboxes and playgrounds and all that good stuff. But right now, obviously, we're not at any of these places that is from the document title. That's on the document title. We're just in the JavaScript console. So this is all true. We're not here. It's going to keep running. And then it just ran through all of them, and we're not at either of them. And so it stopped, right? So again, this is how it's going to execute. This is what it's going to look like. So yeah, so that's a look at sequential for loops. Which, you know, do the same thing over and over again. That's pretty much that. We're going to look at another type of for loop, which is called the enumerative for loop. This is one that you can use on your arrays or objects, and it's very useful. But you need to be able to be a little careful with them. So I'm going to have I do have a couple of code samples, and we're going to look at iterating over an array with this, okay? Let me get this code here. One moment, control copy. All right, so we have this code, and I'm just gonna define it. And as you can see, it's a variable and called page names, and it's an array with 6 items. Now, to iterate over this using the techniques we've already learned, I could use a for loop where I'm sending, you know, I to 0, going to the length of the page names array, and, you know, incrementing every time I go, just like we just did. But there's another way to do this, and that uses the enumerative for loop. And this is what it looks like. We're gonna start off with the for, you know, keyword. And followed by the parentheses. Why can't I get the parentheses? Okay, real. Followed by the parentheses as well. Okay. And then we're going to initialize variable. So we're gonna say var, but instead of doing all the other stuff that we did where, you know, we're gonna set the upper bound, increment, decrement, or whatever, you know, that we need to do. I'm just gonna use the keyword. I'm gonna put P, I'm gonna use the keyword N, and then I'm gonna do page names. Okay, and let me just make sure I spell those right, because sometimes I just be spelling whatever. Okay. So each time through this loop, this variable P gets to set to a different key of this array. So with this array, the keys, you know, are numbers, and I'm expecting P to get a set to a number each time, and as many times there are. So so now you'll notice I'm not saying anything about order, right? And that is the caveat with this. You know, the order is not guaranteed. You know, it's not guaranteed by the JavaScript specification when you're dealing with a for loop like this. In my experience, you do tend to get the keys back in a sensible order with arrays, but you really can't depend on it. But this is a shorter and maybe a little more pleasant to read than the, you know, sequential loops. But, you know, the order of the original array items, if they have to matter to you, you can't trust, you know, these for in the loops exactly. So let me go ahead and finish this code. I actually have, you know, a piece of code. Let me just finish this here. And we're gonna put the 2 curly brackets, right? Shift enter. And then we wanna do the console.log. And then parentheses again. And then inside the parentheses, we have P. And then we're gonna put page names. And then we have our brackets. Inside of the brackets, we're gonna do P once again. Nope, that's not what I said. I said P. And then after that, let's get a little semicolon, because that does it really nicely. And then, cool, that should be it. So let's try it here. All right, so here I go. I have all my keys, 0 through 5, because there are 6 items in here and the names. The console log function can take as many arguments as you want to pass it. It just prints them out like this. You know, you see console log, and it prints them out like this. So 0 is home, 1 is us, 2 is contact us, and so forth. So like I said, with arrays and sequential for loops is more reliable, but you might see this in, you know, other folks' code. So I just, you know, so you can see, you know, what it looks like. A for loop, a for, you know, right here, this in loop, is basically used, you know, on an object in a way that, you know, is harder than sequential for loops, right? So here's page objects with, you know, various properties. So, you know, I can use, you know, ordinary words here, and then, you know, the names. Down here, you know, for loop goes on, and I'm using my variable P. And again, this time it's the pages. So let me go ahead and close this, clear this out. And let me copy this code. It's the same code, but like I said, it's the objects I want to show you, iterating over with objects. As you can see, same thing. It's still with P over the pages, enter, and it just tells you, you know, it gives you the actual, what is named, you know, first home, second about us, third. And again, this variable is P, and it's just gonna go down every single time, which, with, you know, the items that are in the array, right? So each time it's passing through P, it's gonna set it to first, set it to second, set it to third, you know. So that's kind of how, you know, the pages all work, and it's gonna go down. Now, again, you cannot plan on these keys being in the order that you set them in the original, you know, object. You know, this is very important to understand. You know, if the order of the keys matter to you, right? If these order matter to you, you probably should just use an array and use a sequential for loop, right? Let's just make it simple. All right, so let's go back and look at this, this loop a little more through. Now let's see this line right here. We're checking if pages has its own property, right? If pages has its own property, right? This line is what we're looking at. So what I'm asking here is, does this object pages has its own? this this basically as is saying it's uninherited property. So whatever P is, does it has its own uninherited property, whatever that may be, which would be, the first, second, third, and so forth, each time you go through this loop. So without going too far into that topic, JavaScript is an object-oriented language, right? So that uses a model called proto-inheritance, I believe. There's a video about this I can put into the Notion or even in Discord. But for now, our purposes is, it just means that the language can be, modified very deeply. And an object like this, an object that you created, could have inherited properties that that other parts of the code that's active have, entered into it. And those could potentially show up and try to enumerate it, using a loop like this, right? So using has own property in your way of safeguarding yourself against, enumerating over things that you didn't mean to, right? As I say, the details of this are, a little on the, esoteric side. And that's, certainly a lot of code out there, and you definitely will run into this as a problem. But if you're going to, be enumerating over an object using a for in loop, it's pretty important to include this little check right here. So just file it away and know it's something to look for. And if you ever do see it in someone else's code, you know exactly what it means, right? So that's how you can use enumerative for loops to iterate over an object or even an array. All right. Before we even go in, I want to make a little simple thing here. We can do comments, which is 2 backslashes. Okay, and then space, and you're gonna say, this is a for loop example, right? And you're gonna close it with the same slashes, okay? Boom. That means that this is a comment. It will not get executed in your code. It's just here to say what's going on, because comments are very important in your code. You wanna be able to be like, okay, this is what this is, okay? So we're going to talk about one more kind of loop called while loop. To set up a comparison, let's look at a for loop first. So let's copy for loop, and then let's take a look at the for loop. Let's copy the for loop, and let's take a look at it. Okay, as you can see, this is a sequential for loop. We've seen it before. We're initializing a variable, and we're doing all this as far as we're going to take some action in these curly brackets, right? So this is the same thing. Let me get it together. Let me copy it. All right, so we got that. We're going to just do enter, right? And then we have this down here. This is the same thing, right? Expressed, as a for loop, right? It's initializing a variable, and then I have a keyword while, and then in the parentheses is my terminating condition, okay? And then inside these curly brackets here, this will keep happening over and over again, whatever it is here, until I reach this terminating condition. Okay, to make sure I reach it, I include my incrementing inside these curly brackets. And then, these two loops do exactly the same thing. So I copy that here, and let me go ahead and press enter. And as you can see, it's just going to keep going and keep going and keep going, right? These loops do exactly the same thing. We go through 0 all the way through 9, and just like that is a loop. Now, you might raise a little question like, why would you use a for loop when you could just use, or would you use a while loop when you could just use a for loop, or, even vice versa. And that primary reason is, you might use a for loop other than just maybe you like to write things in a certain way. And it's when you don't know how many times you're going to need to loop over something, right? You don't have a particular object over, which you're going to, iterate a certain number of times, or you just don't have a particular counter where the end point. So let me get an example of that. Let me get an example here. I have, Sorry guys, control copy, there we go. My thing was stuck. Okay, so now here's an example. I have an array and it's called my array and it's full of booleans, right? Now, of course, I just made this so I know that, you know, what's in it, but there'll be many, many times, as I said before, in your programs where you won't necessarily know at any particular time during a program's like, you know, execution, what's in it, what's the, you know, saying, what's the contents of that, you know, given variable. So let's pretend we don't know what's in my array. So now I have a variable called my item. And here, you know, is in my, you know, we're gonna put it in our while loop. So let me copy that code here. Hold on, let me copy this. Control copy, and we're going to do shift enter and then control paste. Okay, cool. So and you know, it's in my while loop. So my item right here starts as null. So my condition is that as long as the item is not strictly equal to false, do some stuff here in the curly brackets. And you know, that stuff is first I'm going to log the message into the console and state my array and how long it is. And then it will loop over and over again until we pop a false value off of this array. Okay. Now I'm checking the value of my item each time. And as long as it's not equal to false, I'm going to keep going. Okay. As long as it's not equal to false, it's a loop, like I said. So just to walk through how this would work, the first time my item is null, you know, not false. Right? I do it always in here and I finish off by, you know, popping off a value from, you know, my array. The first time I do that, it's true. So I go again through the loop and hold on, let me go. It's true. So as you can see, I go again through my loop. There we go. Now, there we go. My array has 6 items. Then we pop off true. And at 5, we pop off, you know, where we at? There we go. So we pop off here. 6 items now. This will go into a pop of false, and then we have, you know, true, so we get to 5, and then, you know, that's true, so we get to 4, and again, and then, you know, after 4 items we stop. So this is really good in situations where you don't know the contents of, again, whatever the thing is that you're going to loop over, and you have a condition where you're sure you're going to be able to, you know, break at some point. Now the danger with while loops, really with any loops, honestly, but I think it's really particularly dangerous with while loops is that it's easy to create what's called an infinity loop, right? Infinity loop. And that is one that never breaks or stops. And I have an example of that. I don't want to run it because I did run it earlier today and I had to cut everything down, but let me put this comment in here. Let me put a comment to say, comment out of this break statement to make this loop go forever. Okay, let me copy that. Okay, cool. Boom. So, this will definitely lock up your browser if you take this break out and run it. It will continue to run and run until it won't run again. Right? And I have, you know, nothing else here. It's just true. And again, with this being just true, it is a very tricky value. So with this always be true, it's just going to keep going and keep going and keep going, counting and keep counting. And like I said, we have the break here where, you know, I put this comment, but if you want to, you know, really execute this right now, you can, and it won't stop. You can take the break out and it'll just go completely nuts. It would just print out numbers until there's nothing to print anymore. And your machine, or at least your browser, might just run out of memory, or at least your browser might say, hey, your script is running. Would you like to abort it? And thankfully for, you know, modern computers, you don't have to worry too much about, you know, infinity loops, you know, taking down your whole entire system. But it is something you do want to reach out for, and it's certainly a pain to debug, okay? So just be careful with infinity loops, all right? So yeah, that is our while loops.